What would you do if the only thing your family ever left you was a ranch? Every stranger in 3 counties swore was haunted, a place no rider would cross after dark, a plot of dust and pine and rumor bequeathed to a 19-year-old girl who had nothing else in the world? Martha Fletcher inherited a ghost ranch outside Dry Creek for the price of 1 signature on a lawyer's page, and everyone in town laughed the moment she stepped off the wagon. But what waited beneath the boards of that ranch, and what her own blood had buried there, would rewrite everything she thought she knew about the name Fletcher. Settle in. Stay close. Let us know where you're watching from tonight. The wagon dropped her at the crossroads a mile short of town, because the driver said his mare would not go further, not toward the Fletcher place, not for coin nor kindness. Martha climbed down without argument. She lifted her small carpetbag, thanked him with a nod, and watched the wagon turn on the dust road and roll back toward the mountains it had come from. The wind came slow across the valley and pulled at the hem of her mother's old wool coat. She stood there a long moment, alone on the road, and let the country size her up. Dry Creek sat low in the fold of the hills, a plank street of 6 buildings, a whitewashed church with a leaning steeple, a livery stable, a saloon whose sign had lost half its letters to weather. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys. A dog barked once and thought better of it. It was late afternoon in the last week of September, and the light came down thin and gold and honest, the kind of light that made every scar on a building visible. Martha was 19 years old. Her father had been dead 6 months. Her mother had been dead 9 years before that. She had buried her father herself in a churchyard back east, and she had used the last of the household money to do it. The letter from the lawyer had reached her the week after the funeral. A ranch, 240 acres, held in the Fletcher name for 3 generations. Debts against it near equal to its worth. Come at once, or lose it to the county. She had come at once. There was nothing else to come to. She walked the mile into town with the bag against her hip. Her boots were scuffed at the toe and worn thin at the heel. Her dark hair was braided down her back beneath a plain, flat hat. She was small and quiet-eyed, and did not look like anyone's idea of a rancher. Men on the porch of the saloon watched her pass without speaking. A woman in the mercantile doorway turned her face away. The lawyer's office sat between the church and the livery. A brass plate on the door read, "Merriweather, Land and Titles." Martha knocked once. A voice inside said to come in. Mr. Merriweather was a narrow man with tired eyes and ink-stained cuffs. He rose when she gave her name. He did not smile, but his face softened the way a face softens for someone who has already lost too much. He offered her the chair across the desk and poured her a cup of water from a tin pitcher. "You came alone," he said. "There isn't anyone else," Martha replied. He nodded slowly, as though he had expected that answer and grieved it anyway. Then he opened a leather folder and slid a page across the desk, and Martha put her hand on it and read. The deed named her outright sole heir. The property lay 4 miles west of Dry Creek, at the end of a wagon track that climbed a shallow ridge and dropped into a hollow of pine. A house, a barn, a well, corrals gone to rot. 240 acres of grazing land that had not carried a cow in 11 years. Beneath the description of the property, in tighter script, sat a column of debts. Back taxes. A note held by the bank in Dry Creek. A lien from the general store. When Martha added the figures in her head, they came within $40 of the ranch's appraised worth. "You can walk away," Mr. Merriweather said gently. "No shame in it. The county will take it. Many would. How long do I have to decide?" 30 days from the signing. If you sign. Martha looked at the deed. She thought of her father's hands, thin at the end, holding hers in the last week. He had never spoken of a ranch, not once in 19 years. Yet here his father's name sat on the paper above his own and above hers. "Is there a reason no one's held it?" she asked. Mr. Merriweather chose his words with care. "There are stories, Miss Fletcher, about the place, about what happened out there. I don't put stock in stories, but you'll hear them whether you want to or not." He paused. "Some folks call it the Ghost Ranch." She waited. He did not go on. Martha took the pen from the inkwell. She signed her name in a plain, unhurried hand. Then she blew on the ink and folded the deed and slid it into the inner pocket of her mother's coat. From the doorway of the office, someone laughed. A big, easy, contemptuous laugh. Martha turned and saw a broad man in a good coat leaning against the frame, a silver watch chain slung across his vest. He was perhaps 40, well-fed, clean-shaven. He tipped his hat to her with a grin that had no warmth in it. "You the Fletcher girl," he said. It was not a question. "I am." "Bought yourself a graveyard, then?" He chuckled. "Name's Rutherford Boone. I hold the banknote on your inheritance. When you're done playing rancher, come see me. I'll buy the land at a fair price. Just the land, mind. I've no use for the house." He touched his hat again. "Ghosts are bad for resale." He walked out into the street, still laughing. "Now here's the question we would put to you tonight. Would you sign the paper, knowing what the town said about the land? Would you walk that wagon track alone at dusk, into a house your own father had never named? If you are watching along, tell us in the comments where you are, and how far you would go for the only piece of family you had left. Subscribe and stay close. Because what Martha Fletcher was about to find beneath the floor of that ranch would turn every laugh in Dry Creek to silence. The laughter of Rutherford Boone did not stop at the office door. It carried down the plank street ahead of Martha, and by the time she stepped out into the late light with her carpetbag at her hip, the porch of the saloon had already picked it up. Two men leaned on the rail with their thumbs hooked in their belts and watched her cross. One of them said something low, and the other whistled a single soft note, the way a man will whistle at a lame horse being led past. Martha did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on the crooked steeple of the church and walked with the same steady step she had walked in on. The wool of her mother's coat was warm at her shoulders, and the deed inside its pocket lay flat against her ribs like a second, colder heart. At the mercantile she stopped. She needed flour, matches, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, and a box of long candles. She had counted the coins in her purse on the wagon that morning and knew to the penny what she could spend. The clerk was a thin woman with a mouth that pinched when she saw who had come in. She weighed the flour without a word. She measured the coffee without a word. When Martha asked for lamp oil, the woman glanced past her at the window and said quietly, "You truly going out there tonight?" "I am," Martha said. "By yourself?" "There isn't anyone else." The woman shook her head once and pushed the tin can across the counter. She took Martha's coins and counted them twice and gave back 3, which was more change than the sum allowed. Martha looked at the coins in her palm. "2 for the walk," the woman murmured, and turned away to the shelves. Outside, the light had thinned to the color of weak tea. Martha shifted the bag to her other hip and started for the livery to ask the road. She did not reach it. An old man was sitting on an upturned crate in the alley between the church and the smith. He was small and dry as kindling, with a beard the color of ash and eyes gone milky at the edges. A carved cane rested against his knee. He did not look up as she passed. He spoke instead, as though he had been waiting to speak for some time. "Girl." Martha stopped. "The house did not do the killing," the old man said. His voice was thin and level, like a wire drawn tight. "Mind you remember that when the floor speaks." He said nothing more. His hands folded over the head of the cane and his chin sank toward his chest. Martha waited for a breath, and another. A dog barked at the end of the street. When she looked back, the old man had closed his eyes, as though he had said all he had ever meant to say to her, and would not open them again for her sake. She did not understand him. She held the words the way a person holds a coin found in a coat pocket, uncertain of its value, unwilling to throw it away. At the livery, the boy who watered the horses would not meet her eye. He pointed west with his chin. 4 miles. Track climbs the ridge, drops into the pines. You'll know it. Then, softer. There's a lantern hook by the barn door, if the wire hasn't rusted through. Thank you, Martha said. Behind her, from the saloon porch, Rutherford Boone's voice rose again above the general murmur. Give her a week, he was saying to whoever would listen. Give her 3 nights. She'll be back down that road on foot, and I'll have the paper off her for half what I offered. A ripple of laughter answered him. Martha adjusted the strap of the carpetbag on her shoulder and stepped out of Dry Creek onto the wagon track that led west, and she did not look back at the town, though the town watched her go. The track climbed as the boy had said. It was narrower than a road ought to be, rutted deep from old wagons and softened by weeks of no traffic. Sagebrush pushed up between the ruts. On either side, the land opened into pale grass gone bronze with the season, and above that the ridges stood dark against a sky the color of a bruise fading. Martha walked. The bag grew heavier at each half mile. She shifted it from hip to hip and then carried it 2-handed in front of her, then set it down for a breath and picked it up again. Her boots pressed prints into the dust that the wind at her heels erased almost as soon as she made them. Somewhere past the 2nd mile, the sun dropped behind the ridge and the light turned blue. The air cooled quick. She saw an owl lift out of a juniper without a sound and vanish downslope. She heard once the far cry of a coyote answered by another farther off. Otherwise, there was only the small, dry sound of her own breath and the creak of the leather grip of her bag. She crested the ridge as the last light died in the west. Below her, cupped in a hollow of pine and stone, sat the Fletcher place. She saw the house first because it was pale. 2 stories, plank-sided, the roof sagging on the north end like a shoulder gone bad. A porch across the front had lost half its rail. Behind it, the barn stood square and stubborn, larger than the house, its doors shut. A wellhead with a broken windlass. Corrals rotted down to nubs. Beyond, the pines began and did not stop. No smoke, no lamp, no living thing that she could see. Martha stood on the ridge a long moment with the deed against her ribs. Then she walked down. The front door was not locked. The hinge groaned when she pushed it. She struck a match on the sole of her boot and lifted the flame. A front room, a cold stone hearth, a table with 2 chairs, dust like the fur of some soft animal on every flat surface. The air smelled of pine sap and old ash and something else beneath both, older and drier, that she could not name. She lit one of her candles and set it in a tin dish on the table. She did not go upstairs. She did not open the door to the back rooms. She swept a place on the floor near the hearth with the side of her boot, laid down her coat as a blanket, and set the carpetbag under her head. She did not sleep at first. She listened. The house did what old houses do. It ticked as it cooled. A shutter tapped somewhere above her. A mouse ran a small errand along the wall. Wind moved in the chimney with a sound like a low breath drawn in and let out. Then, deeper in the house, from somewhere beneath the boards she lay upon, came a slower sound. Not a footstep, not a settling, a single, patient knock, as if something long ago had learned to wait, and was still waiting. Martha opened her eyes in the dark, and did not move. The knock did not come again. She counted 100 breaths, then 100 more, waiting to hear what she had heard. Only the wind answered, and the small clockwork of the cooling house. After a long while, Martha closed her eyes, and though she did not mean to, she slept. She woke to gray light in the windows, and a candle burned down to a puddle of wax. The floorboards under her cheek were cold. She sat up slowly and looked at the boards where her ear had been. They were plain pine, wide, dark with age, secured with square-headed nails driven long ago. Nothing about them said anything. Martha put on her coat, took up the candle stub, and walked the front room by daylight. The hearth was stone laid dry and true. The table was heavy. The 2 chairs matched. A cupboard against the north wall held 3 tin plates, 2 cups, a knife with a bone handle, and a small iron skillet, all coated in the same soft dust. Somebody had left them ready, as if for a supper that never came. She opened the door to the back rooms, a short hall, a kitchen with a black stove and a wood box empty of wood, a bedroom with an iron bedstead and a mattress gone to mousework, a second bedroom with nothing in it at all. She climbed the stairs, testing each tread. The upstairs held 2 more rooms under the sagging roof, both empty except for a rope coiled on a peg and a child's boot lying on its side by the window. Martha stood a moment with the boot in her hand. It was small, the leather cracked, the sole worn thin at the ball of the foot. She set it back where she had found it and went down. In the front room, she paced the floor slowly, foot by foot, listening for what her boots told her. Most of the boards sounded the same. A low, dry thump, the sound of pine over a good subfloor. But near the hearth, 3 boards to the left of where she had slept, the sound changed. Not hollow, not exactly. Deeper. A longer note, as if the space beneath breathed differently there. She knelt and ran her hand along the seam. The boards fit close. The nails sat flush. Nothing said hatch. Nothing said seam. Only the sound. Martha stood and stepped back. Her father had taught her once, when she was small, that a house tells you what it is, if you will let it. She thought of that now, and of the old man in the alley who had told her the floor would speak. She did not have tools. She did not have light enough. She did not yet want to know. She looked at the 3 boards a long moment, marked their place in her mind by counting from the hearthstone, and turned away. There was a well to draw, if the well still gave. There was a barn behind the house whose doors she had not opened. There was daylight, and daylight was the thing to spend. She left the boards alone and went outside. The morning had come up pale and cold, the pines dark against a sky the color of tin. Martha stood on the porch and watched her own breath. Then she saw the dog. He stood at the corner of the barn as if he had been waiting for her to look. He was old, lean past thin, his coat the color of dry grass with black at the ears and muzzle. One eye was clouded, the other was clear and steady. He did not come forward, and he did not go away. He only watched her with the patient attention of a creature who had watched this porch before. Martha did not speak to him. She went to the well and cranked the broken windlass with both hands until the wire took hold, and the bucket came up half full and rust-colored. She poured a little into a tin dish from the cupboard and set the dish on the ground halfway between herself and the barn. Then she stepped back to the porch and waited. The dog crossed the yard on stiff legs, drank without hurry, and lay down beside the dish with his chin on his paws. He did not take his one clear eye off her. That was how they began. Martha spent the morning at the barn doors. The bar across them was set in iron brackets and had swelled with damp. She worked it out with a stone in both hands, and when the doors opened, a wedge of cold, pine-smelling dark opened with them. Inside, the barn was larger than it had looked from the ridge. A hayloft above. 6 stalls along one wall. A tack room at the back with a leather harness hanging from a peg, cracked but whole. A wagon under a canvas, its wheels sound. A workbench with tools laid out as if their owner had stepped away a moment ago and never come back. A claw hammer, a hand plane, a brace and bit, a pair of iron tongs, 3 chisels in a row from wide to narrow, and a small pry bar with a hooked end. She stood in the doorway and looked at the tools a long time. Then she stepped in. The dog followed her as far as the threshold and lay down there, across the line of sun. Martha worked. She swept the front room with a broom she found in the tack room, the straw stiff but serviceable. She carried the mouse-eaten mattress out to the yard and turned it against a fence post to air. She fed the black stove with kindling split from a fallen limb and coaxed a small fire and boiled water in the iron skillet for coffee, because she had no pot. She drew a second bucket from the well, and the water came up clearer. Her hands remembered things her mind had not asked for. She had helped her father mend a fence line, a stovepipe, a chair. Her palms knew the weight of a hammer. Her fingers knew a splinter before her eyes did. In the barn, moving the canvas from the wagon, she found a name burnt into the wagon's tailboard with a hot iron. Fletcher. Below it, smaller, a second word half scorched away. She ran her thumb over what was left and could not read it. In the tack room, hanging behind the harness, she found a leather-bound tally book with the pages foxed and stuck. She set it on the workbench without opening it. In the last stall, kicking through old straw, her boot struck something that did not sound like wood or stone. She knelt. It was a horseshoe, nailed to a plank, and the plank had been laid flat across the floor of the stall as if to cover a soft place. She did not lift the plank. Not yet. By afternoon, her back ached, and her hands were black with dust. The dog was still at the threshold. When she came out to rest, he thumped his tail once against the ground, and she found she had begun to expect him. She sat on the porch step with the tally book on her knee and did not open it. There would be time. She had 30 days, and the first was not yet done. But 3 boards near the hearth, a plank in the last stall. A word burned away behind a name. Small things, each on its own. Together they leaned toward one another like men bent to hear the same low voice. Martha watched the pines darken and did not yet know what she would do. That evening, Martha lit 2 candles in the tin dish and sat at the heavy table with the tally book open in front of her. The pages were foxed and stuck at the edges, and she parted them with a knife blade rather than her thumb. The first pages were what a tally book ought to be: head counts, brand marks in ink beside a column of dates. Hay bought, salt bought, a bull traded for 2 heifers in the spring of a year Martha had not been born. Her grandfather's hand, she thought, from the loop of the F. Then her father's hand, thinner, later. She turned pages and let the ledger do what ledgers do until the writing changed. Near the middle of the book, the columns fell away. A single name was written across a page in her father's younger script. Beneath it, a date. Beneath that, 3 words. Found in barn. Then a blank page, and then another name, and another date, and 3 more words. Found in well. Martha turned the page. Found in the pines. Found near the ridge. Found in the hollow behind the stall. 4 names in all, none of them Fletcher, and each with the same short accounting beneath. She read them twice. She read them a 3rd time. She closed the book with her thumb marking the place and set both hands flat on the table. The dog was at the doorway. He had come inside without her noticing. He watched her without moving. Martha took a candle and the small pry bar from the barn. She counted from the hearthstone as she had promised herself. 1, 2, 3, and set the hooked end into the seam. The nails were old and gave in the way old nails do, complaining once and then all at once. She lifted the first board, then the second, then the third. The candle bent its light into the gap. Below the floor was not earth. Below the floor were stone steps, narrow, dry laid, going down. Martha did not go down at first. She sat back on her heels and let the light show her what it wanted to show her, piece by piece. A step, another step. A landing of packed clay. Beyond the landing, a door of plank, closed with a wooden bar. She lowered herself and set the candle on the bottom step and lifted the bar with both hands. The chamber was small. Its walls were dry stone. Its ceiling was the underside of her own floor. On a shelf inside were 4 things laid out in a row, as if by a careful hand. A woman's shawl, folded, a pocket watch, its chain broken, a child's boot, matched to the one upstairs, the same cracked leather, the same worn ball, and a tin, square and dented, tied shut with twine. Martha took the tin. She untied the twine. Inside were letters and a folded sheet in her father's hand. She read the sheet by candle. It was an accounting, plainer than the ledger. 4 travelers, 4 seasons, 4 graves he had not dug because they were already dug when he found them. A man before him had done the killing. A man who was not a Fletcher, but had used the Fletcher barn and the Fletcher well because the Fletchers were quiet people and did not lock their doors. Her father had found the chamber as a young man, had sealed the floor over it, had not spoken of it to anyone living, and had written it down here so that someone one day would know. At the bottom of the sheet was a line in ink, still black. I could not name him without naming us, forgive me. Martha sat on the bottom step with the letter in her lap and did not cry, though her eyes shone. The house did not do the killing. She understood the old man now. She understood her father. She understood, too, that the man who had done it, or one who profited by his silence, might still be living because a secret so carefully kept had cost her family 3 generations of reputation, and no one lets a thing like that go for nothing. She climbed back up into the front room and set the boards loosely into place and blew out one of the 2 candles. The dog had not moved from the doorway. She sat beside him with her hand on his shoulder and watched the pines go black. She did not sleep well. Toward the middle of the night, the dog lifted his head and looked toward the ridge. A moment later, Martha heard a horse coming down the track at a hard pace, and then a second horse behind it. She rose in the dark, put on her coat, and went to the window. 2 riders came into the yard with a lantern between them. She knew the broader man by the silver watch chain that caught the lantern light even now. Rutherford Boone did not dismount. The second rider, a lean man Martha had not seen before, held the lantern high and looked at the barn and at the house and at the well as if measuring each. Boone called her name once. Martha did not answer. Boone called it again and said he had come to make his offer plain. Half price tonight, on paper he had brought with him. He said the house was not safe. He said fires started easy in old timber. He said a girl alone should think on how the wind ran up this hollow. His voice was pleasant. That was the worst of it. Martha lit the lamp on the table so they would see her shape at the window and know she was awake. She said, through the glass, 6 words. "I am not selling tonight, sir." Boone laughed the way he had laughed in Dry Creek. He told the lean man to leave the paper on the porch step and turned his horse. Before they went, the lean man drew something from his saddlebag and set it beside the paper. A tin of kerosene, uncapped, laid on its side so the smell would carry. Then the 2 horses climbed the ridge and were gone. Martha stood at the window a long moment. Then she went out and capped the tin and carried it to the well and lowered it in on the wire. She took the paper from the porch step, folded it once without reading it, and put it in the stove and lit it with a splinter from the kindling. She watched it burn. She was still watching when she heard, from the direction of the ridge, a woman's voice calling for help. Martha took the lantern from the hook by the barn door, and the dog rose stiffly and came with her, and together they went up the track toward the ridge. Halfway up, she found a woman on her knees in the sagebrush with a child pressed against her coat. The woman was perhaps 30, thin, her lips split, and the child was small and quiet in the way frightened children are quiet. The woman said her husband had put them off the wagon on the road above, and that the lean man on the horse had said this house was safe. She said it as if she did not quite believe it. Martha said 4 words, "You are safe here." She brought them down to the Fletcher place and set them by the stove and gave them coffee from the skillet and bread from her bag. And while they warmed, she went back out and stood on the porch and looked at the ridge. And she understood, plainly, what she had chosen. She would not sell. She would not run. She would open the floor in daylight and let the town see what her father had covered, and she would name the man Boone protected, if a name were there to be named, and she would carry the cost of the naming herself. The dog leaned against her leg. Martha put her hand on his head. Inside, the child had begun, at last, to cry. At first light, Martha walked the 4 miles back into Dry Creek, with the tally book buttoned inside her mother's coat, and the woman and child following at a distance in the wagon she had rigged from the barn. Drawn by a borrowed mule, the livery boy led out without a word when he saw who was on the seat. She went first to Mr. Merriweather. She set the tally book on his desk, opened it to the page where the columns ended, and laid her father's letter beside it. Mr. Merriweather read slowly. He read it twice. When he looked up, his tired eyes were wet at the edges, though his voice stayed even. "These names," he said. "I know 2 of them." "Then you know the 4th season," Martha said. He nodded once. He asked her quietly if she understood what she was asking him to do. Martha said she did. Mr. Merriweather took his coat from the peg and walked with her to the church, and the church bell was rung, which had not been rung on a weekday in 11 years. The town came. They came in 1s and 2s, the mercantile clerk with her apron still on, the smith with his sleeves rolled, the livery boy leading his father by the hand, old men from the saloon porch with their hats held against their chests. Martha stood on the church step and told them, plainly, that the Fletcher place had a chamber beneath its front room, that 4 travelers had died on that ground before her father's time, that her grandfather and her father had covered the floor because they could not name the killer without naming themselves, and that she was opening the floor that afternoon, and any who wished to see could ride out. She did not raise her voice. She did not weep. She named the 4 names from the tally book. At the 3rd name, a woman in the back put her hand over her mouth. They rode out. Mr. Merriweather came, and the smith, and a doctor from the next valley who had been sent for by Ryder before noon. The doctor was a spare gray man with clean hands who knelt on the packed clay of the landing with a lamp and looked at the shelf and the shawl and the boot and the watch for a long time before he stood. "Your father wrote the truth," he said. "I can testify to it in any court that asks." Rutherford Boone came too, because he had to. He stood at the back of the crowd in his good coat with his silver watch chain dulled by the pine shadow, and when the doctor spoke, the laughter went out of his face and did not come back. The lean man was not with him. The lean man, it was later learned, had ridden west before dawn and was not seen in the county again. Boone did not speak. When Mr. Merriweather asked, quietly, whether the note on the Fletcher land might be reconsidered in light of what had been found, Boone took a long breath and said only, "I will carry the paper myself, sir, at its full term, without interest." He did not look at Martha. He tipped his hat to the doctor, mounted, and rode back to town alone. The woman with the split lip stayed. The child stopped being quiet, in the way frightened children are quiet, and in a week was chasing the dog through the pale grass behind the barn. The mercantile clerk sent flour without a bill. The smith came out on a Sunday and rehung the porch rail. By the end of the season, the corrals were mended in 3 places. The well ran clear, and there was smoke from the Fletcher chimney every morning that could be seen from the ridge. Travelers began asking at the livery for the road to the Fletcher place, and the boy who watered the horses now met their eye when he gave it. Mr. Merriweather brought papers out one afternoon that returned the 4 names to their families back east, with the doctor's hand and Martha's beside her father's, so that 4 graves elsewhere could at last be marked. The 4 small things from the shelf, the shawl, the watch, the boot, the tin, were buried together in the churchyard under a plain stone that read only, "Travelers, remembered." Martha paid for the stone from what the mercantile clerk had counted back to her, the 3 coins for the walk, kept in a jar on the shelf above the stove and added to, coin by coin, through the fall. On an evening in the last week of October, Martha stood on the porch of the Fletcher place with the light going amber on the pines, and the ridge already blue behind her. The dog lay across her boot with his chin on his paws. The woman and the child were inside setting the table. Mr. Merriweather's mule was tied at the rail. He had come out with the finished papers and a jar of preserves from his wife, and he was inside washing his hands. The barn doors were open. The wagon with Fletcher burned into the tailboard stood in the yard, and the second word beneath, which had been half scorched away, had been read at last, in daylight, by 3 pairs of eyes, and it was the word, home. Martha looked at the hollow and the pines and the smoke going up straight in the still air. She did not think of Rutherford Boone. She thought of her father, and of the old man in the alley who had told her the floor would speak, and of what she had done with what the floor had said. Mr. Merriweather came out onto the porch and stood beside her, and after a while he asked her gently what she meant to call the place now that the papers were clean. Martha watched the light on the ridge. She put her hand on the dog's head. "It was never a graveyard," she said. "It was a house waiting for someone to keep it." Mr. Merriweather nodded once and did not speak. The dog let out a long, slow breath. Inside, the child was laughing. "Thank you for staying to the end of Martha's story, for walking that ridge with her, and for sitting up with the candle while the floor learned to speak. If this quiet kind of courage moved you, leave a like, a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight, and subscribe so you will not miss the next tale from the long roads west. When a widowed blacksmith takes in a lame colt no one else will feed.